We might as well start now. So hello and welcome to the Engerati studio. You probably know my face by now. We're at Charge 2016. But more interestingly, we're joined by Boyce, Senior Product Director of Marketing Strategies International. So like you've heard already, Casey has strong views on customer engagement and those who don't really follow through. However, more importantly, you've doing a lot of work on brand loyalty and customer engagement, especially in the residential sector of power and utilities. So do you want to tell us about that?
Sure. So at Market Strategies International, we've got a study that is now in its fourth year, or getting ready to be in its fourth year, that looks at brand trust, product experience, and operational satisfaction, all of which roll up to this engaged customer relationship metric that we developed across residential customers. We cover 130 utilities, electric, natural gas, and combination in the US. We have a similar study that focuses on commercial customers. It's a little bit narrower in scope, 59 utilities, electric and combo. But really what is unique about the study that we do is not only are we looking at those three metrics that roll up to the engaged customer relationship, but we've got a lot of diagnostic work in there as well. And so you can really kind of dig into and peel back the onion, if you will, if you say, okay, you know, my customers aren't engaged because they don't trust me as a brand. Well, why is it that they don't trust me as a brand? Well, you know, maybe my reputation isn't good. Okay, so what do I do about that, right? So you can get several layers deep to start looking at, you know, what are the real root reasons for performance.
Okay, so look, let's take on this metrics point, because from an engineering perspective, you know, metrics are important. And from a grid operation perspective, there are tons of metrics out there. You know, you can pick a penny, there's loads of them, analytics, whatever.
Absolutely.
How important will metrics be in the brand value and engagement mix?
Well, I think it's really critical. And you know, when you look at how utilities and power companies are managed, the engineering side is fairly straightforward, right? I mean, you can calculate, you know, how many megawatts you're generating. You can calculate, you know, capacities. All of that's cut and dry, right? When you start to get into something like brand, it's a little more intangible, and so it becomes more difficult to measure because you can't put your finger on it and say, boom, that's it, right? So what our study does is it really allows you to have those metrics that are consistent across the industry, that are consistent across time, so that you can start to say, okay, we took this action, what was the actual impact of that action on our customers? Are they more or less trusting of us? Are they more or less engaged with us? Are perhaps some customers responding better to this action than other customers are? So it becomes really critical as a performance management tool.
Right. Well, it's interesting that you take that, you make an obvious point of focusing on actually quantifying this, because like you said, it's an area that's not necessarily being quantifiable, so to speak. And you mentioned energy. You mentioned, well, brand trust. So I'm going to take that as one of the key metrics here. The other metric that you mentioned previously was satisfaction.
Yes.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Brand trust versus satisfaction.
Sure.
How is it an either or? Which is more important? Or what's your general take on that debate?
Sure. So first off, I don't think it's an either or, right? They're both important. The challenge is that in the US at least, satisfaction has been the be-all end-all metric, and it's not. So expanding our view beyond just that concept of satisfaction allows us to get a more complete understanding of how the customer is relating to the utility. And when we look at the interplay between those, certainly satisfaction drives trust. You know, if you think of your utility as reliable and they actually deliver on that, great, you know, you trust them to be reliable, right? It also goes the other way. So for example, when you look at brand trust influence on operational satisfaction, those that have higher trust in their utility also report higher satisfaction. It's about a 51-point bump in a 1,000-point scale. So it's fairly significant in terms of its ability to drive what has, you know, heretofore been a core metric. I guess the other thing that I'll say too is because the focus for so many years has been just on satisfaction, What we're starting to see now is that satisfaction is more or less optimized, and when you look at results and ranking, a lot of it is statistical noise. So it's not necessarily meaningful or actionable, whereas some of the metrics that we have around brand trust and product experience, those things haven't been optimized yet, and there are opportunities to dig in and do some optimization that really genuinely moves the needle.
Okay. Look, I've got another question here.
Yeah.
This is actually based more on what's come out of the conference so far, and it's actually quite trending on Twitter at the moment. And it's that whole green branding and the viability of the green brand.
Sure.
In fact, your tweet was off the back of someone else's comments. I believe it was Statcraft, or I'm not sure. And you said, what they said was, it's more about that there is a business model, a viable business model. Someone's making profit. Do you think, in a way, is that kind of tied into this whole brand trust? If we can see you investing more in green, recruiting more green staff, then that makes the whole thing more trustworthy, as opposed to you just saying, well, we're green, prove it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to how you meet your customers' expectations. So I don't know that there's any inherent brand value in being green. Now, the value for a brand, whether it's a utility or anyone else, is the fact that the people are generally more aware of environmental impact and expect their utility and other companies to be more sustainable, more environmentally friendly in their operations. So from that perspective, if you're a utility and you're not being environmentally friendly, so we see this with Duke and the coal ash spill in the Carolinas, we see this with SoCal Gas and the methane or the natural gas leak in Aliso Canyon, consumers take a really negative view of that, right? They don't want you messing up the environment, and so that erodes trust in the company. But you don't necessarily get a positive bump, right, by being more environmental. You get that with some customers, but it's not necessarily a big kind of brand driver, if you will.
All right, so it's less about, be green for green's sake. It's, if you are going to do it, make sure you actually are doing it.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's been a lot of talk at the conference here about, make it real before you talk about it being real, right? So, I think if you've got a customer base that's expecting you to be green, do it, right? They're going to be disappointed otherwise.
You heard it here first, right? In fact, I think one of our previous interviews, one of the other utility experts actually said you need to walk the talk. Probably the first time we've heard that, but you get the drift, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Let's move to another metrics here. Another key metric here, and is the customer ease versus first contact resolution. Now, are these not a function of each other, or am I missing the point here?
No, you would absolutely think so. And this is the beauty of having a large and really rich data set, is that my colleague Chris Overley started doing some work looking at first contact resolution and customer ease. And a lot of customer experience professionals in the utility space in the US have been putting a lot of emphasis on first contact resolution. Not a bad thing, okay? Let me be clear about that. But what we found is that if the experience, the service experience is easy, so it's rated highly as being easy, it doesn't matter how many contacts you have to have with the utility to resolve the issue, it doesn't depress customer satisfaction. If the experience isn't perceived as being easy, then every additional contact does depress customer satisfaction. So to me, that suggests that we're perhaps putting our focus in the wrong place, right? We ought to be looking at easy service interactions, making it easier for our customers. And then, if we can resolve the issue in one contact, fantastic. Nobody really wants to have multiple contacts, I don't think. But from a satisfaction standpoint, ease is much more critical than how many contacts it takes.
Actually, that does make sense. When I think about it, I'd really like my problem to be solved in one go. However, if it's one very painful go, I might not be that happy about it.
And if it's multiple painful goes, you're in big trouble, right?
Obviously.
Yeah.
Okay, look, here's one of the other points here. This whole perception of, the communication here and the perception really, outages, failures, and faults. That tends to be the point of communication.
Yeah.
As opposed to say service rollout update. Actually, to be honest, that probably would lead to an outage of some sort, but whatever.
Yeah.
These things are inevitable, okay?
Yep.
Well, until you find some other way of putting across power without stopping the network and whenever. Or how can how can power and utilities actually deal with these positively, and how crucial will being able to do that be in the context of a more unbundled, a more competitive retail space, an increasingly competitive retail space?
Yeah. So let me sort of start with some context that historically, and data has backed this up, when a customer experiences an outage, that depresses their satisfaction with the utility, right? And you combine that with the other typical interaction, which is the bill, and someone made the point earlier at the conference that these are not good experiences, right? Your only experience with the utility is a negative interaction. And so I started having some conversation with folks a couple of years ago about, well, what if you took that outage experience, or what if you took that billing experience and figured out how to approach it in a way that actually increases customer satisfaction, that actually increases the customer's trust of you as a utility. And again, one of the benefits of having a really rich data set is that I was able to go in and I found 6 utilities in the US where the customers who had experienced an outage over the last 6 months, they actually reported higher satisfaction, higher trust, higher engagement than customers who didn't experience an outage, right? So we recently released a best practice report that talked about what some of those utilities did to achieve the result. Kind of counterintuitive, right? And really what it came down to was understanding what customers needed and meeting or exceeding their expectations, and a real focus on excellence in one area before moving on to another. So an example of this is Seattle City Light. They developed an outage map in-house to provide information to their customers. All of their outage communications referred people back to that outage map. They continually upgraded it, and so that is now the hub for what they do vis-a-vis outages. And so, that becomes a point that they can leverage into news media. It becomes a point that they can leverage to their customers. So customers aren't, calling necessarily, they're going to that map. It becomes something they can leverage in social media. And so it has this nice multiplier effect once they had that in place and were, deploying it in a really consistent and excellent fashion. That sort of focus and level of focus with outage communications is one way that utilities can take that potentially negative event and turn it around into something that's positive.
Okay, so would you then say that, going back to that initial conversation we were having before we so rudely had to start the interview, all things being equal, customer engagement, customer satisfaction, brand trust, these things are all worth your time, but as long as you actually really appreciate the metrics of getting there, is that sort of, if there was a key takeaway you had for someone in the power and utility sector looking to do something next, what would that be?
Absolutely. Well, and again, it's because of the way that our study is developed, we can peel back the onion. So you start at the engaged customer relationship level, and you can say, are we doing better or worse today than we were 6 months ago? Are we doing better or worse today than our peer utility set is doing, right? And so from there you can then look at, well, why is that the case, right? So I have conversations all the time with our clients that say, okay, what do we need to be doing better, right? And so that's how we start, is we start at the top level and we just keep digging down until we get to a point where we can reasonably say, okay, here's where your customers are saying that you're falling down compared to your peer utilities or compared to what you did in the past. And it could be a brand trust thing, right? So it could be that people perceive your management as being low quality, or it could be that the products and services that you offer stink. They don't perform as promised, they're not easy to use. So, my experience, other than maybe my, plug working every time I plug it into a socket, is horrible. Or it could be that, you keep sending me inaccurate bills. Fix that, right? So
yeah, definitely do that.
So depending on what it is, right, you put your focus in the different places, and the metrics allow you to do that because you're able to track and quantify all of it. And again, if you develop that analysis and say, I got to fix my billing process, you can track that over time and say, okay, we made this change. here's how customers are scoring now on this same component, and it's better or worse, and you have an objective way of saying it worked or it didn't work.
Okay, well, I think that's a brilliant place for us to bring this interview to an end.
All right.
So thank you very much for your time, Casey.
My pleasure, Ade.
And of course, to the audience as well, thank you very much for listening into this session. If you'd like to hear more about getting to the bottom of the real value there in customer engagement, satisfaction, and brand loyalty, please check out this interview. Casey's also got a special report in the digital branding and retail magazine, which provides a quick, easy-to-read summary as well. And by all means, contact Marketing Strategies directly if you'd like to get the full report and get some more actionable insights for yourself. Check out the other interviews on your screen as well, if you could rather. Thank you very much.